This is Comic Shenanigans, episode 1123, a conversation with Chuck Austen, creator commentary on Ultimate X-Men 13 to 14, X-Men Unlimited 44, and X-Men Unlimited 45.
Ain't no stopping them shenanigans. Love getting into shenanigans. All up in them shenanigans. 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 Shenanigans.
Welcome to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. I'm your host, Adam Chapman. This is episode 1123. It's another conversation with Chuck Austen. He's back on the show, this time to do a creator commentary on Ultimate X-Men 13 to 14 and X-Men Unlimited 44 and 45. This is yet another fantastic, fun conversation with Chuck as we kind of peel back the curtain on some of his work back in the early 2000s. This time talking about Ultimate X-Men and 2 issues of his X-Men Unlimited. He did a number of stories in X-Men Unlimited, but we talk about the specific 2 issues, 44 and 45, where he did full-length issues, one which was very much about animal cruelty, and the other one that was focused on Alpha Flight. So this was a lot of fun to once again kind of go back with Chuck. It's been really interesting to kind of hear his perspective on his work, because again, he's looking at stuff that he wrote over 20 years ago, to kind of remember, what he was writing, what he was thinking, thought processes, where Marvel was at, what type of stories they were asking him to tell. It's a really interesting perspective on those. Ultimate X-Men was an interesting one for me to go back to, because I think as a younger man, I don't know if I appreciated, not that I didn't appreciate the work, I probably just as a context thing was like, why are we getting something so different? Because Ultimate X-Men, got those first 2 big arcs out of the way by Mark Millar and one of the Kubert brothers, and then we have this 2-issue diversion with Gambit that doesn't connect to anything really, and never really connects at all, and Gambit doesn't show up again for like another 2.5 years. So it always felt like this weird outlier that I didn't quite understand. It's interesting going back and understanding the context of it all. It is actually a very well written story, but it's one of those things where if you're not expecting it and you're not understanding why you're getting this story, that maybe you can't appreciate it. So reading it without any of that baggage, without any of that kind of context stuff at the time, it almost succeeds much better. So this was a lot of fun. Again, it's a true blast to have Chuck on the show. He's been on the show a lot. If you check the show notes, you'll see that there's I think 8 other episodes, maybe 7, that you can listen to a month, some with Pat Olive, some just on his own. So you definitely check those out. Speaking of Pat Olive, he will be back on the show soon. I think we're recording the first week of January, so he will be coming back for another creator commentary solo soon. Ron Friends will be coming back on the show soon too. I'm very excited to have him back. I'm not sure if it's going to be a discussion of another Thor epic, which is the plan, or if it's going to end up being a whole episode on his newest 10-page story that was in Venom 252. That's kind of how we got sidetracked last time on his Fantastic Four fanfare story, but we just talked an hour about his 10-page story there, so it's completely possible that happens again. So anyways, that's just some of the upcoming episodes. We also have a Book of the Month Club talking about the DC Universe and some DC Christmas issues that'll be actually releasing, at least the plan is, that'll come out on Christmas Day as a nice little present. So thanks again for listening to the episode and to the show. You can email me at comicshenanigans@gmail.com, rate the show on Apple Podcasts, listen to us on Apple Podcasts, and also listen to us on Spotify. You can also check me out on the most recent episode of the Comic Geek Speak podcast. I've always been a big fan of the Comic Geek Speak podcast, so I was the prestige sponsor who got to join them for an episode 2043, which just released a few days ago. So you should check me out over there. If you're coming here from Comic Geek Speak, welcome. That was a true blast to be on their show, and hope to at some point be able to come back on their show. So thanks again for listening to this preamble. Let's jump right into the conversation with Chuck Austen, because that's why you're really here. Enjoy. Chuck, welcome back to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Adam. Thanks Always like it being here. Always like talking to you.
Absolutely. It's always a real pleasure. I think this is number 8 or 9, so you're getting close to double digits, I believe. So today we're talking about a few books, but the first ones we're going to talk about is Ultimate X-Men 13 and 14, which is, in the way back era, back when the first Ultimate Universe was still relatively new. So this one has always been very puzzling to me. So I'm hoping that you can kind of explain a little bit of the context. And so at the time,
I know I can.
The Ultimate Universe was this hot new thing. You have Mark Millar's doing X-Men, the X-Men version of it. He does 2 amazing arcs, which I would say kind of work like movies on their own. They're really tightly paced, and you got a lot of big bam action. And you get, after the first year, we have this side story with Gambit, who at that point had not really been introduced. So as a context thing, I remember as a kid being like, what's happening here? Like, where's the main team? What's going on? Reading it now, I really like this story. It's so well written. But at the time, I'm wondering what the reaction was, or what you heard from readers, because it is well written. It's very enjoyable, but also it's not the main team. It's this diversion, and you're only a year into a book. So I'm curious what you can tell us about kind of how that came about.
Sure. Yeah, that's an easy one, actually. It was Miller was at that point. Was it Miller or Millar? I
believe it's Miller. It looks like Millar. Okay. I believe it is Miller.
Okay. I mean, I've met him a few times. He's always been really nice to me. We've always got along well, but I don't. I never asked him how to actually pronounce his name. So he was doing a lot of stuff at the time, and he had reached a point where he just needed a little time to catch up. So these were essentially 2 fill-in issues that they asked me to write. And because of those and War Machine, it's actually what led to me writing Uncanny. I believe that was the order that it came in. I wrote the scripts, and then they said, why don't you come in and do Uncanny? But they wanted to introduce Gambit to the Marvel Universe, so they figured, and Mark said, I don't have room. I've got all these other characters that I've got to deal with, stories that I've got to tell for them. And they said, well, why don't we have Chuck do it in a 2-issue fill-in thing, and then if you want to use him later, you can maybe find a way to fit him in, but at least he's in the Ultimate Universe. So it was Mark Powers and Pete Franco at the time, and they got in touch with me and said, would you mind doing this? And I said, no, I think it'd be really fun. I didn't know anything about Gambit at the time. He was a character that came in after I'd stopped reading comics, but so I had to do a lot of research on him. But yeah, that's basically the reason that it happened the way that it did. And the story, the genesis of the story was the one thing that we talked about was, because they didn't really know where they wanted to go with it, and I said, well, at the time I think it was it Chris Angel or somebody else like him, Street Magic guys. I said this is becoming really popular right now. What if he's like a street magician, and and I just sort of kind of run with it from there. And they said, okay, and can you use Hammerhead? And I went, okay. so that was basically sort of the genesis of it. And then I went away and wrote a story about Gambit, and it's the one that you see. It basically, I think it went through with very little revision or change. They were really happy with it.
I was going to ask about that, because obviously, when the Ultimate Universe is still pretty new, the whole idea is this is a whole new continuity. You can do whatever you want. So, I mean, having done the research, how much of pre-existing Gambit did you even want to use, and how much of it did you just want to synthesize into something new? I mean, obviously on the page we see something that is radically different. Well, yes and no. You still have this kind of rapscallion angle to him. You definitely lean more into the language, but it feels more authentic. So I'm curious about, if you studied the dialect to get it kind of feel right, because often in the main Marvel Universe they'll throw in a few words, but that's really it. That's much of the kind of linguistic flourish you get in terms of his dialect. But it felt like you leaned more into his background. So I'm curious how you kind of developed Gambit's way of speaking.
That's actually an interesting question, because it was something that I don't know that anybody had tried in comics before, but. As far as all they wanted was for him to have the same personality and sort of the same background, and there are hints to him having a similar background in the names that get dropped. I mean, Sinestro his name gets not. Was it Sinestro? Not Sinestro. I'm getting my
Sinister
characters. It was Sinister, Mr. Sinister, thank you. So those names kind of get dropped in there a little bit to kind of add some depth to potentially who he is in this universe. But like with everything else in the Ultimate Universe, they just kind of wanted to tell new stories. They were looking to introduce, the big move at that point was to try to reach new readers, and the continuity had gotten so thick in the original books that they felt like new readers couldn't drop in easily anymore. And that's kind of where the Ultimate line came from. And so the approach with Gambit was to make him accessible to new readers. And I was allowed to use as much or as little of his original origin as I wanted to use. And in order to keep it a kind of a simple two-off story that Mark could use or ignore, depending on how he wanted to do it, this was the approach that we decided to take, rather than using all the other characters and potentially screwing up with his longer-term plans. We just decided to have Gambit have a little solo story of his own. And the response was fantastic, actually. We got great reaction. I think a lot of people were a little surprised that like you, that this early in the run that they were doing this sort of solo Gambit series, but he was he's a beloved character, and I think that the response was really good. People came up to me and asked me to sign a lot of the first part of it, not so many of the second. In fact, there was this one funny story where these three girls came up. They were so excited to meet me because they loved that first story, the first half, and I said, well, the second half is out. Did you get a chance to read that? And they all sort of looked at each other nervously, and I just got this impression, we didn't like that as much. They didn't say that, but I just sort of got the impression that that's what they were thinking. So, but it was far more violent. And as far as the linguistics of it, I live in LA and I work at television, and one of the things that actors do is that there's this place called Samuel French where you could go and you could buy copies of plays and screenplays and get basically so that you can have scenes to rehearse with each other or practice with each other to sort of keep your game up. And they also have dialect tapes. So I went in and I got a Cajun and Creole tape and brought them home and listened to them. And they explain not just how to speak it, but why certain inflections happen in a certain way at a certain time. And so I just listened to that all the way through the whole time I was writing it.
Oh, wow.
So that was basically, that's how his dialect, that's why it was so much heavier, because I didn't realize, all they told me that he was sort of based on the Big Easy, and the Big Easy had, everybody spoke that way. So I didn't really have time to go back and reread all of the comics that Gambit appeared in, so I just gave him a much sort of heavier accent than I think most people would have.
The whole story, I mean, when you read it, first of all, great sense of pacing. It's very fast-paced. It moves briskly. It does feel very cinematic. Like, it feels like it could be like almost like a John Wick style movie. Like, it's very simple. Like, it's deceptively simple because it's, he's got to protect this person, and you really deal with the emotions of it. And it's interesting. I love the idea that they just kind of asked you to use Hammerhead, which is such a random inclusion. Like, he's not an X-Men character at all. And yet they're like, use this character. But I really liked how you use this version of the character. And again, you don't need to get a lot of depth into that villain. It's just, sometimes they're just a bad guy, right? And I really appreciated that. But it was very harrowing. Like, you start out with like this little girl watching her parents get murdered. Like, that's a rough go. And this is a testament to you as a creator. After the second issue, I'm like, I just want to know what happens to that girl. Like, I really want to know what happens next, right? Like, I did feel very invested by the end, that, like, I understand why Gambit has to leave her, but at the same time, like, I want to know what happens to her. And I wouldn't feel that way if you didn't make me care.
Thank you. That's very very nice of you to say. I appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, my pacing comes from all of the, I read a lot of screenplays here, and you have to figure out how to pace them quickly and keep the viewer interest up, and that's just that definitely got into my blood, I guess, in how I approach a script, even for comics. So I appreciate that. It's one of the things that I was most proud of, actually, when I went back through and read it. I thought, wow, this is tight. There's no dead meat in here anywhere. It just, the thing keeps moving, and I felt it felt really good. I was actually quite proud of it, and I know that Assad and Livesey were both really excited to work on it. And I loved Assad's artwork on it. He did a fantastic job. It was super fun.
One thing I really appreciated about it, and because it's a reinvention, you're able to do this, is that there's just something very raw about how you write this version of Remy, because he's not as old as the one we're used to seeing. He's not as polished.
Yeah.
He's more unformed. So there's just something to his interactions which really ring true as to someone in this situation who is young and just kind of impetuous and running off and not always maybe thinking everything through, but it still feels authentic to the character, if that makes sense. So I really liked, again, it felt authentic to what I know of a Gambit character to be like, but also a new spin, and again, a new younger version, which I thought Assad did a great job of making him look visually distinct, but also similar, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, and I appreciate you saying that, because that was something we worked hard to do. The irony is that with comics, one of the things that makes it less accessible to new readers is that the most interesting version of the characters are often the early versions, when they're still rough and raw and they make mistakes, and they're still, they're motivated by sometimes selfishness or stupidity. Obviously one of the greatest early personality traits of Peter Parker was that led to his Uncle Ben's death, and those kinds of things are the emotional. Gives it the power and the emotional resonance that people really attach to when they're watching a movie or a TV show. And and as the series goes along and the character kind of loses those rough edges, they become a very different character, and sometimes less accessible to new people getting into it. In fact, that's one of the biggest complaints that you get is if you give them too much conflict, the fans object, because they don't argue like that anymore. They get along all the time, so it makes it really tough to kind of create a dramatic tension between characters sometimes, because they just it's a much different world than, say, it was when they all first got together.
For sure. Well, it's interesting about comics too. I mean, if you've been reading comics since, or all these characters' adventures since they started, they fought these characters so many times. Like, at times it feels like, well, obviously he's going to take him out because he's done it so many times. It's hard not to have your character almost become jaded themselves about how easy things are. Like, I remember I was a fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer back in the day, and there was a point at which the characters seemed to themselves be like, I'm past this. Like, this is too easy for me. And, like, at that point, how do you keep things fresh? One thing I wanted to point out as well, or a question I have for you, is on issue 13, you have a great kind of way. The issue ends with, Gambit waking up, seeing the note, don't come looking for her, and then this great splash page of him just, like, all that kinetic energy kind of rippling through as he's screaming. I was curious, that no that's kind of above him, was that in the script? Was that something that kind of came afterwards, seeing the art? And I'm curious, obviously I think Sharp Font did the lettering here, so I guess that was built in, or is it something that Assad did? I'm just curious, because it's a very striking visual image. So I'm curious how the no kind of above him kind of came into being.
Well, I believe I wrote the no in there, because that was obviously that's the trigger that's going to make you want to pick up the next issue, obviously. So, but I think as Assad did a sort of a sketch drawing of it over the top, he gave it more kind of life, and I believe the lettering crew followed that to try to give it a lot more punch and power. So it was big. It was much bigger and cooler than even I expected it to be. That's kind of what I loved about what Assad did, is he sort of brought that kind of visual wholeness to everything, thinking about, okay, where do the word balloons go? How does this character move from this panel to the next panel? And that was one of the things that I was impressed with. I believe, I'm sure the no was there, but he and the letters made much more of it than even I imagined. So
it ends up
and that's what I love about collaboration, is that the sum of the parts becomes bigger than the whole, better than what you expected.
Well, it ends up feeling like a part of the art. Like, that's what sets it apart, right? Like, it's not just your typical narrative box anymore. It's actually part of the story. Like, it feels different. It hits different as a result.
Yeah.
One thing I didn't mention, great covers by Adam Kubert, I believe.
Yeah.
Unfortunately didn't do the interiors with you, but some really great covers.
I would love to have. I wanted to buy that cover and even sell it to me.
Oh, no?
Both of those covers. I wanted to buy both of the covers, yeah. It was. I loved it. I loved everything about those two issues. It was just an absolute fun ride. And, Pete and Mark were fantastic to work with and very supportive. So that was great.
Again, I'll give some more credit to Assad as well. Like, especially in that second issue, some of the action sequences are so, like, he's really testing new things with his art. It's interesting. I'm used to, the modern Assad is so different in terms of some of the interpretations, not in a bad way or just a different way. Whereas here, like the not opening, but I guess the second page of the second issue, when you have Gambit kind of flying through the door and almost like the ripple effects, so you can feel the speed at which he's really rocketing through and kicking these guys. Like, that's a really cool. I don't even know how he affected that, to be honest. Like, I look at it, I'm like, there's just something about the waviness of the line work. I don't even know how it works, but it really captures the essence of the movement.
It was fantastic because I wanted that to play as visually as possible, so I didn't want to have to go in and put any text balloons over the top saying he kicks in the door and he slides, like Silver Surfer across the floor or whatever. And that and the scene where he puts a card underneath the manhole cover and uses the manhole cover to blast himself up to where Hammerhead is. That stuff, I loved the way he handled it, and I loved the fact that I could pull back. Pat lets me do that too, where he'll give me something so much better visually than I expected that I pull text off because I just want his pictures to sort of tell the story.
You do have in the second issue a brief inclusion of Xavier and Storm. Was that mandated, or is that something you threw in yourself?
No, it was. I don't. Actually, I don't know that I can honestly say. I'm pretty sure that they may have wanted to sort of touch base with Xavier and Storm, or with some of the characters from the main cast. I honestly don't remember whose choice it was. Whichever one it was, I liked it. I liked having it in there. I would have argued with them if I didn't. So
it's funny. It almost reads like a video game where like he's on the way to the next boss, and there's like an optional side mission. They're like, "Hey, come over here," and he's like, "No, I'm dealing with the main mission right now." Yeah.
I like the idea that. And I think part of that was we were also thinking that we wanted to give Mark the option of ignoring anything that I did if he wanted to. Mm-hmm. So it worked with his character. He doesn't trust people. He doesn't believe that they're there. He doesn't believe anybody's there to actually help him.
Mm-hmm. When you have the final kind of battle between Gambit and Hammerhead, like obviously it's pretty brutal, violent, and quite an interesting ending and use of Gambit's powers. Was there any pushback about how violent that was?
Surprisingly, no. And that's what's weird for me about rereading these is the stuff they let me get away with is kind of mind-blowing. They were okay with it. In fact, they liked the idea because so many people think, he's got these exploding cards. Well, it's not exploding cards. The power is in him. Mm-hmm. And so they liked the idea that I was making that distinction. And it was a shock and kind of cool to kill off a villain that actually everybody was pretty into for 2 issues. Yeah. They liked him. That him getting his head stuck in the window and just all those little touches made him sort of real to everybody. And so, melting his head at the end was kind of fun. And I was surprised and I was glad, and I'm glad they let me do it.
The emotional kind of resonance of him having to leave this girl alone, I think it packs a greater punch because you do spend the time with the last couple of pages to actually like have him give her a moment. Like it doesn't just kind of end and he immediately disappears. Like he gives her the moment with the umbrella, this moment where she can kind of be free for a moment and almost forget this horribleness that she's had to endure over the last couple of days, and the fact that the one person she's latched onto is about to leave. And so like that's a really rough moment, but I like that you care as an audience more because you give the moment time to breathe and let her have that moment of lightness, which is a nice thing for Gambit to give the character. But also as a reader, it also ends up packing much more of a punch than when he leaves.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's something that's important to me, and it's hard to do in a 22-page comic. In fact, sometimes Mike Martz actually thought it might be because I'd come from a sort of a half-hour world, but my scripts were always about 2 to 4 to 6 pages too long, and we had to come in and figure out a way to kind of cut stuff back. And often it meant that those visual moments, I was surprised that we managed to get that much I mean, it's like a page and a half almost, or
Yeah.
if I remember that with her in the umbrella. And I was so pleased that we were able to do it, because sometimes you just don't have the room for that kind of thing. But having those moments, especially with no text and just an emotional beat between two characters, it resonates and it sticks with people. It's, similar to I think one of the other comics we're going to talk about, Can They Suffer? There's a couple of those moments in there too as well.
Any final thoughts on Ultimate X-Men? I'm going to move on to X-Men Unlimited 44, which you just mentioned.
Okay. Just enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it. Enjoyed working with everybody on it. Haven't spoken to Assad or Livesay really much since then, and 20 years is too long. But they're incredibly talented. Love them both. Great. Everybody was great.
Okay. So next up is X-Men Unlimited 44. Now, I can't remember the chronology, but obviously you were writing Uncanny at this time, because otherwise, where would Sammy come from? Like, where's, obviously Juggernaut's already there. So how did that kind of assignment come on to start writing a bunch of this isn't the first one, obviously, but this is one of the few that were like a full-length X-Men Unlimited story, because a lot of them were, it was becoming more of an anthology, had a bunch of stories, but this is the full issue. So I'm curious how this kind of came about. Was this something that you would have done in the main Uncanny book, or like why did this end up over here and not in the main Uncanny?
This was a weird little one, and it was a similar story to one that I had wanted to do to kind of move the Juggernaut Sammy storyline along, but I didn't know that they were going to let me do it. And then, just fortuitous that this came about the way that it did. But it was a strange little project. Marvel has this thing where they sometimes partner with different people. Like, I wrote a National Guard comic once, and sometimes they'll do a Target special comic or whatever. This was a situation where Doris Day's animal rights company had come to them and said, we want to do a kind of a partnership with you and do a comic about animal rights. And so they called me up and asked me if I was interested in writing it, and I said, sure, let's talk. So I got on the phone with Doris Day's people. I didn't actually meet her, but we met the people that she worked with. Very nice, really encouraging, and with the editors, and I think Casada might have been there, or at least on the call. And so we were just sort of talking through some stuff, and they said, well, have you got any ideas? And I said, well, there's this sort of one idea that I've always wanted to play with a little bit, and it's based on that famous quote about, it's not about whether they're intelligent, it's about can they suffer. And they knew the quote by heart. I sort of had this vague memory of it, and I was misquoting it actually. They knew the quote by heart, and they said, oh, so-and-so's quote. And then they said, we can send you the whole thing, but yeah, that would be a great place to start. What do you think you would do with it? And I said, I don't know. Let me give it some thought. And I think it might have been the editors. I think it was Mike Martz and Mike Rach at that point. I didn't check the credits, but I think that they're the ones who suggested that we use Sammy as the main protagonist, which really it just, because they were already tied into what I was doing with Uncanny. They sort of knew where I was going with it, and it worked. It just worked really, really well. So I wrote a script, and I said, look, I got some ideas, but this may be a little brutal. And they said, that's okay. We want to go there. Sometimes their feeling was they pull back so much on some of this material that it doesn't have the impact that they wanted it to. And I said, look, I'm all about hitting those emotional beats as hard as possible. So we, if I had something big, we talked about it. Like, do we have Jean, lock into one of the dogs that has been tortured, and can she not get out? Is that something that can happen because of who she is in Uncanny? Yeah, and they said, yeah, absolutely, let's do it. I said, okay, well, how about, can we have Jean punish them in a sense by showing them what it feels like? Is that too much of an invasion? And they said, we can put it off as she's been traumatized by this whole experience up until now, and she sort of lashes out. And, it might not ordinarily be something that she would do, but if you sort of set it up right, we can make it work. And the Doris Day's people said, we would love to see that, because we think that empathy is one of the things that we kind of have to build in people to get them. That's like, we were talking about your son before we started. It's like the more people empathize, the more these things can change. And so I went there. I went there on every scene, and they never at one point pulled me back. And I was really surprised. And the funny thing is that when you first asked me to, reread this stuff so we could talk about it, I remembered the story, and I remembered it had a little bit of a punch, but I didn't realize how far I'd gone. I was in tears myself. You said your son cried just from seeing a single image. And I was like, if you need to cut that out, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to reveal a personal thing, okay. But it was, I was tearing up, and I was crying at the end of some of these stories. I was like, wow, what was I doing? And it's not that it's not that I think it was bad. It's just like one of the things we were talking about before is it's a different marketplace. This is more of an escapism marketplace, and here I was writing something that it packed a wallop. I mean, it was pretty potent stuff.
It's interesting. I mean, yeah, I guess comics are about escapism.
They let me do it all.
Yeah, but I'm curious. Well, there's a lot to unpack in it. Obviously, I mean, it's interesting to know the background, because it does kind of paint a picture more as to like why and how this kind of came about. It is an interesting story because it kind of achieves both what they're looking for as as an animal rights story, but also, as you said, pushing the Sammy and Juggernaut story along as well. So it kind of achieves both items quite well. And I like that you're not afraid to lean on the fact that like Juggernaut is a bully and did bad things, but doesn't necessarily even realize it. Like, he's like, oh, just kids are kids screwing around. Like, we do that kind of stuff. Like, it's not a big deal. And I like that because you get to kind of have that turn for him. So he starts to realize, and as you said, maybe you mentioned this off podcast, but the idea afterwards when he's like, I didn't want to be small. Like, that, especially to someone like Juggernaut, who especially his big thing is that like he can't be stopped. He is the biggest guy. So the idea that he would make him feel like that, and again bring him back to a place where like his dad was not a good guy and was not a nice guy to him, and there's a reason why he ended up kind of the way he was, wanting to exert his strength over someone else because someone had always lorded it over him. So it makes sense. Like there's a lot of that kind of trauma made sense. So again, I really like that exploration, what that meant for Kane. Again, it's tough to read at times because it does feel so real. It is so raw. And at the same time, you're dealing with all the stuff with the animals, which again, the way that you do it, having, Jean experiencing it and having like experienced torture is hard to read. But like in an effective way, like not in a bad way. But like it's because you care about Jean, and now you're caring about these animals because she's experiencing it and voicing. And this is what comics, I guess, do so well, is that being able to, you feel like you can feel that moment because of how you're seeing the images, but you're also seeing the audio, and it's not going too quick. That's what's so magic about comics, right? Is that you as the reader control the pace and how quickly you, or in this case, maybe not quickly, you're experiencing those moments. Whereas if this was on like a TV show, it might be really fast and then it's over, and you're not really in it in the same way. Whereas reading it sinks into you for a moment, and maybe you're going by it really quickly, or maybe you just are stuck on it, and that's what's so magic about comics. I don't know if I had a question there. I just said a lot.
But I agree with you. I mean, that's actually one of the things that I sort of rediscovered reading it. When I was reading her quoting the dog's thoughts, every line made me cry a little more, and I literally had to pause. And if I was watching that on TV, it'd be the kind of thing where it would almost be coming at a pace that it would be overwhelming. I would want to turn it off. I would want to get up and walk away because it just. But reading it, you could like read a line, like wanting to crawl into the old lady's lap so she'll know them. God, see, even now. Just potent stuff. But yes, you have that moment. You can take it at your own pace. You're not being force fed it. Which is so weird, because when we won the award, we won the Genesis Award for human animal rights. They showed a video of foie gras is made. Geese being force fed to the point where sometimes their stomachs would explode, and it's that same kind of feeling. It's like you can have stuff force fed to you to to a point where it's just not good for you anymore at all. So yeah, it was weird. It was. I'm proud of the story. I'm really glad with the way it turned out, but it is an unusual read. But at the same time, I think that may be one of the reasons why it won the award. People were kind of blown away by it. I think that really it caught people way off guard.
The animal thoughts, I think, are what really hit you, right? Because it's interesting that you're in the mind of a dog, but you're hearing it from a human, and seeing that verbalization. Like even if I show them my stomach, they'll stop, and you feel sick to your stomach reading it. Like you feel that torture moment, and again, it's easy to be like, oh, it's just an animal, but they're going to have thoughts too. And as you said, can they suffer? And then having Gene say it and verbalize it, it's uncomfortable, but it is very impactful. Like it's hard, again, not to read it and not be like, I am moved by this. It's hard to read, but I am moved.
Yeah, and that to me is when those are the kinds of things that people remember, that connect the most. And sometimes they're hard, but always they're the kind of things that people remember. Although I wrote it and forgot. So maybe don't remember for too long.
Randy Gentile did the letters, and I did want to mention that, again, in that moment with Jean, when you finally get to kind of the very crescendo of her channeling these moments, and you have like just the red text, please make them stop killing me. Like it was a very judicious use of when to go over the top with letters. So I just wanted to mention that they did a really good job. Like, I think the panel before, you have the please stop in just like a starker black. It's starting to get bigger, and then it spills over into this like bright red, which, makes it seem like a louder thought, right? Like, so lettering is so interesting to me. I was talking to Richard Eisenhower Richard Starkings, I should say, a couple of years ago, and it's when I first really understood like the artistry of lettering, which seems so stupid. Yeah. I'm sure that sounds dumb to you because you're like, well, obviously, I work in the industry. I know that there's an art to it. But sometimes as fans, we take it for granted, and it's one of those things where bad lettering is sticks out the sore thumb. In theory, the best lettering, you almost don't notice it. Like it just tells the story, right? So I do try to make mention of letterers because they do not get the credit they deserve, but they do so much heavy lifting. So I just wanted to mention
they absolutely do, and I'm not shaking my head because I'm an artist and I know, like you said, I know what letters do. I'm doing it because I do the same thing. I forget to credit the letters all the time, and yeah, you're absolutely right. They're at their best when they're invisible, or when they add to it in a way, like you just said, where they bold it in the right place in the right way, and it just it accentuates the story even more. And this one was one that was just top to bottom, man. Everybody that worked on this one, Romano, and was it Danny Mickey, I think, did the inks on this one.
It was
an amazing effort on everybody's part. Super happy.
That first shot of Wolverine in the treehouse, that is haunting.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and again, stuff that okay, you guys let me do this. I'm going to do it.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts on this issue before we move on to the next one?
No, just again, really proud of it. Really proud of the whole team and everything that everybody did on it. It was a magical experience, and not only that, but I got to meet Daryl Hannah. So it was nice. It was fun. And I went to the bathroom next to Sean. What's his name? Samwise Gamgee. I went next to
Sean Astin.
We used Sean Astin. Yeah, we had to use the toilet together.
Magical moments.
Magical moments.
So the next one we're going to talk about is actually sequentially the next issue, X-Men Unlimited 45. So I'm really curious about kind of the genesis of this because it's not an X-related story in the strongest sense of the word. It's an Alpha Flight story. Like even Jean being on the cover, I'm not sure why she's there.
I wondered about that myself. I was wondering, but I guess Jean sells better than than Sasquatch or Shaman. I don't know. I mean, I try not to question. And in a lot of the cases, those they were doing covers and they were thinking of them as like Bill Jemas was thinking of things as like the way they do magazine covers. It's like the cover is about an arresting image. It doesn't matter if it has anything to do with what's on the inside. So that was a period where a lot of the comics were, what cool image can we get from this cool artist? And I don't care really if it has anything to do with the story. So, but that story, is that C.B. Cebulski? Was he the editor on that one?
He was.
Okay, because I think he was also the editor on the previous one. But he and I had become friendly when I was out there visiting, and we both were interested in manga and had long conversations about manga and the manga industry. And he mentioned that they wanted to do an Alpha Flight story. Did I have any ideas or anything that I wanted to do? And I said, well, no, I've never really been all that interested. I mean, Alpha Flight I thought was a kind of a good concept, but it was a bunch of characters that didn't really want to be superheroes, and it just sort of bled through the comic and made you feel like they're not interested. If they're not interested, why should I be? And he said, well, why don't you do something about that? He said, I said, all right, well, probably who I'd start with is Hudson, because he's like, all he ever does is whine and complain about being the leader, and he doesn't want to be the leader. It was supposed to be Wolverine or whatever the case was. So how about if I give him a reason to be the hero? And CB was like, yeah. So that was pretty much it. I don't think I had any more. I don't think we had any more of a discussion than that. I just sat down and wrote a script. To the end, and then they really loved it. What would motivate? I had a pretty good life at the time. I was writing comics. I was working in animation. I was having fun. There's no reason in the world I would want to put on a super suit and go out and fight crime and maybe leave my children as orphans. So, and that was kind of what led to it. I thought, well, if I was going to be a hero, it would be because for these kids, it would be something that I would do to protect my wife or my kids. So that was kind of where it came from. And the idea was that at the end of that, his attitude would have changed, and I thought it might help solve some of the problems that they had with Alpha Flight as a concept, to make Hudson like genuinely I want to be a hero. I want to save the world for my kids, my wife. So that was really the whole goal of it. I mean, it's funny when you're working for Marvel, you're often thinking about how can I help to make their properties more valuable. It's not really so much about the initial impetus is that. It's not so much about what story do I want to tell. But for me, it always does come back to story eventually. I love telling stories, and I study it all the time. So, but yeah, the initial impetus for that was, I think, just let's look at Hudson in a new way.
I do really enjoy, again, it's very character-centric, character-focused, like plot, not necessarily secondary, but it was more about, as you said, kind of exploring this guy and what really makes him tick, and how to, as you said, kind of make him more accepting of who he is in the comics, right? Or like this character. So I did really like that. I hadn't read it in so many years that I really forgot a lot of the kind of the nuts and bolts. So when I open it up, I'm like, oh yeah, it starts with him like dying. Like this is quite the direction to take. And like my son was reading over my shoulder. He's like, wait, what's happening? And I'm like, I don't know yet. Like we're just kind of jumping in. But no, I really enjoyed it. There's just something about how you have him kind of almost zombie-like coming back, like trying to push his way into being operational so he can save his wife. That I found very compelling. There's just something very raw about that, and even like as he's slurring his words, he's not really able to speak, but like he's doing everything he can to pull himself back together so that he can, save his wife. Tremendously affecting. There's just something about that, and it's interesting the use of language. Like even there's something about the broken language. The phonetics of it all really sold the moment, if that makes sense. Like it made me feel his desperation. And again, the letterer also has to be given some credit here too, because of how the letters are used, and you can feel that it's like guttural, that it's like it's hard to speak, and yet he must speak. So there's just something really powerful about that.
I agree, and in the end, that's one of the reasons why I leaned as heavily as I did on Gambit's dialogue in the Gambit story, because when you start speaking in that rhythm of dialogue and that sort of music of the language, the character becomes different. He's much more. It made him much more upbeat and much more charming in a way, because he would speak in this like Cajun dialect where he's trying to and then just the misunderstanding with the little girl where she says, "Your pants? What about your pants?" So. So that kind of stuff is, and I agree. So I mean, it's why I did it in this as well, as I was looking for that thing that shows that on every level he is trying to, as you said, push himself away from death to saving his wife, and he can't even make his mouth work. That's kind of where he was. That's what I was thinking. They mentioned that one eye was blind. There was just all these things that were bad about him at that point. Shattered arm and. So, yeah, that was the whole thing, is that there was at this point, there was nothing that was going to stop him from being a hero. Nothing.
One artistic element that made me laugh, and the more I read, and the more I'm curious about if it was something that came from you, editorial, or the artist, was Heather wearing the baby on board shirt. And part of me wondered, was that to remind the reader that she's pregnant, so that we're not surprised when she gives birth at the end? Or was this always designed? Was it something that you came up with? Did the artist come up with it? I was just curious about that particular visual use.
I don't remember specifically. I don't even know if I still have those scripts, so I don't know if I can check. But I'll take the credit for being smart enough to add that visual so that but it could have been the artist. I honestly don't remember. But I think my wife was, I think at the time, pregnant. So I may have had those things in my son was born around this time. He was born in 2004. I believe she was pregnant at the time I wrote this story. That's part of what made me think of it. But so I can't answer that honestly, but I'd like to think I was smart enough that I did it for the reasons that you mentioned.
To give credit to Popman, who is the artist, there's a particular shot when I think they're in the middle of flying to, go save Heather, and you have James is in the kind of new prototype kind of suit, and you just have this look of his face, and half of his face is all mangled and sloping down, and the other half just shows resolve. There's just something really compelling about that, because it shows both just how bad he's been hurt, but also the fact that the part of him that still can respond is not going to let anything get in his way. And it's a really easy, it's a deceptively simple visual, but it communicates so much.
I'd like to say thank you, but that may have been Pop all on his own. So I can't. I'll just say thank you. I'm glad you liked it. On behalf of Pop.
How early in the story breaking process were you certain that you were going to have her actually give birth during this adventure, as opposed to just having her still be pregnant? Is it because you really wanted to make sure that he had the baby in his arms at the end, so that he could really turn that next screw and be like, this is what I'm doing it for? Or was that more effective to you as a creator to have an actual baby than just the promise that the baby was coming?
No, it was important to have the baby there, it just ratchets up the stakes, because it's at that point it's so insane. Is everybody gonna die while she's giving birth to his child? Obviously raising stakes is one of the most important things you can do in a story. So I'm fairly sure that was the intent, but also there was a bit of the fake out. It's like he gets to hold his child just long enough before he dies. So that was part of what the thinking was. It wasn't just that he needed to hold his child to feel like he had accomplished what he needed to, but that they could never see each other again after this point. It's you start to think, it's one of those things where you think about the kid hearing about that for their entire life. You actually did meet your father. But then obviously he survives. Thank God. I made Angel have that healing ability, because I didn't know how else I was going to save it at the end of that story.
It's funny, after these 4 issues, I guess I have to ask, do you write any comedies? Anything a little lighter for us to read?
all the time, actually. In fact, I've written novels that most of them are romantic comedies with a lot of drama in them. One of them is a rewrite of Pride and Prejudice that takes place in a nudist resort. The other one is it's a James Bond spoof that is like as darkly, funnily satirical as you can imagine. It's based on some 60s porn versions of these James Bond books that were written back in the day by this amazing writer who influenced everybody from Donald Westlake to Harlan Ellison. But he committed suicide when he was very young, and so a lot of people don't even know who he was. He never had a career beyond those sort of porn books that he was doing, and they weren't even really porn. They were just like sort of salacious in their way. So yeah, I do comedy all the time. I love comedy. In fact, one of the things that Pat loves about working with me is I slip jokes in there all the time, especially in Edgeworld. There's a lot of funny stuff that I try to get in there.
That's true.
But I guess when it comes down to it, I tend to go for these, like Mike Martz used to call them my one and dones. He said, man, I love your writing, I love your arcs, but these one and dones that you do are just killer. And that's just sort of, it's like my default. It's like these sort of Twilight Zone-esque personal stories that have an emotional punch of some kind. But I always, you read Defiant. There's a lot of comedy in Defiant. There's a lot of comedy in Tormented. You've read that too. So, but they do tend to go a little dark. Maybe not as dark as these. This was an interesting collection because they really went there, all four of them, in ways that I wasn't expecting.
A lot of death, again, a lot of emotional stakes, and I guess that's the part that I guess that I'm responding to more, is that you're really like grabbing you by the heartstrings and making you care. And so, and again, which is again a testament to your writing here, is that you make me care. Like, what's so fascinating about a done-in-one that pulls you in that quickly, makes you care, and then just doesn't let go until the issue's over. Like, that's not easy to do. Especially, again, with like the Gambit, you're jumping into ostensibly a brand new character. Hasn't been done before in this universe. We're just jumping in. This is who the character is. Even Alpha Flight, if you had never read Alpha Flight before, gives you a pretty good idea of who Alpha Flight is, which, again, is a testament to your ability to craft. I do think that is something that is... sorry, I'm losing my voice. I do think that's something that is lost somewhat in comics these days, is the ability to do a done-in-one, or to do a concise beginning, middle, and end. It might still be part of like a three-parter, but being able to actually give you something that has a solid ending of some kind, as opposed to just a chapter. So when I'm reading these stories, I'm really captivated by the fact that you are giving me a solid unit of entertainment, but with a solid beginning, middle, and end.
Thank you. That's always been important to me. That's probably my main driving force. And in fact, most of the comics that I loved the most when I was younger, a lot of this, they were all, a lot of one and dones that I loved a lot. And but the through the course of my career in entertainment, emotional connection with your audience is the single most important thing. In fact, I try not to criticize other people's work, because I know how hard it is to do, both as a comic or as a TV show or a movie or whatever. But one of the things for me that Jonah Hex lost from the originals was that sense of heart, that sense of vulnerability that Jonah Hex had. If you read the very first story, it's about him feeling like he can't fit in because of the scars on his face, and it hurts him. You can tell. There's a woman that won't even let him talk to her son, and he's trying to have this bravado on and trying to be, and some of it, they took pieces of it for the Jonah Hex movie, but they lost all of that. They lost all of that vulnerability. And vulnerability is one of the things that people react to and relate to the most in a character. So it's been really important to me to have that kind of an emotional connection and that sort of potency, and to have a story that connects, as opposed to like sort of what the other side of that spectrum is when what we used to call continuity gap fillers, where somebody would say, oh, well, it doesn't really make sense that this happened and then so-and-so did this. what happened in between those. And so somebody will write a story that connects the continuity, but it doesn't really have a beginning or a middle and an end other than those two stories that people probably didn't read anyway. So it's like a choice. It's a choice and an approach to take. And my approach has always been, to try to give it as much of a. That's why in some ways I don't think the arcs worked for me as well, because for one thing, you've got more editorial interference. They want you to have a certain number of issues so that you can fill a trade paperback at that point. And then, you're working in the middle of the second story and you find out that Grant Morrison wants to take your villain away from you. And so all of a sudden you can't use the villain to finish out your story. So it just made it harder. But the one and dones were like, I can sit here and I can have this complete story. And if you guys are okay with it, then we'll just run with it. And there were a bunch of them. Most of my favorites were the one and dones. There was the Kurt, when they get Kurt to, or North Star to join the team and he's trying to save that kid who's dying. That's one of my favorites. There's another one where they're trying to bury Skin, and the cemetery won't let him be buried because he's a mutant. So those are all stories that were really potent and powerful for me, and I love doing those. But like I said, it's a general audience. Is very different from sort of the fan audience. They're definitely looking for different things. People send me comics all the time and say, "Oh, you should read this." Like somebody was telling me that Sammy's back. Juggernaut, revived him on Krakoa, and I was like, and then they send it to me, and I can't understand a word of it because it's like it references 400 issues that I've never read. So, but the fans apparently loved it, and that's great. If that's what they want, that's what they get. But if you want stuff that's going to connect to just regular people, it's a very different approach. And this, what you're talking about here is what I strive for in everything that I do. Even in the comedies, I do what I can to, I worked very hard on. It's called Pride and Nakedness is the book, and I worked very hard to make those characters likable and people that you can relate to, and they're all based on the original Jane Austen characters, so it's great to have kind of a template to work from. But it's a contemporary story, trying to write it in contemporary language and still maintain the sort of the social. That's why I wound up going with nudists and clothed like very rich people, because it was like, how can I have the same idea of you are beneath me and still make it feel real in ways that it just doesn't feel as real anymore, so. The class system just doesn't exist as much. And now, of course, I say that because I wrote it in 2008. But, now we're living in this age of the haves and the have-nots, and it's just getting worse. So maybe I was wrong. Maybe I should have had more of a story like that. I don't know. But it's a part of to me, it's a part of the writing process, is to find a way to have that heart, have those emotions, have that connection, even in a comedy.
So I'm going to have you back for more, because there are more X-Men Unlimited stories that you did write. Some of them are shorter, but they're not the full-length ones. But there's a few that I read over the last couple of days just to kind of think about other things I want to talk to you about. So I will have you back for more. We have not exhausted your inventory yet. So I'm excited to talk to you more about those. But again, Chuck, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk about these books. They were a real blast to go back and read. Hard reads at times because of the emotional element, obviously, but it meant that it was effective. So I can't be upset about that.
I appreciate that, Adam. It's always great talking to you. So I appreciate you asking me.
Well, I'm going to keep doing it until we've exhausted more avenues to talk about. So again, I appreciate your patience. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be sure to have you back.
Sounds great. I'm ready.